Sometimes God allows things to happen because we will not do what God is drawing and pushing us to do because we're stubborn. Now someone says, how in the world could God have allowed Pearl Harbor to take place? You must go back a little bit. Before World War II started, there was a tremendous anti-Semitic spirit that was sweeping Europe. Some of the bankers and some of the aristocrat and the ruling class was a small minority group of people that were Jewish. They had literally taken the reins of the European nations, and they were in charge behind the scenes. Financially, they controlled the banking industry. They controlled much of the politics, etc., etc. And there was an opportunity for Israel to become a nation, and Israel chose not to leave Europe because everything was good. They offered them a place in Africa that was uninhibited except for some of the jungle tribes and said, we'll give you this land. That fell through. They offered them to come and have a small community in Canaan or Israel, which at that time was under the Turkish rule, and they didn't want that either. They didn't want to leave that place. So God raised up Hitler. Now, I love the Jewish people, and Jewish people as a whole, the Hebrews, have a covenant and the hand of God upon them. Doesn't mean that every Jew is a great person. In any group of people, there's good people, there's bad people, there's honest people, there's dishonest people, etc. But as a nation, they are an apple of God's eyes with a future. And in that sense, I love them. I also have some Jewish friends, which I'm very fond of. And we've talked about this, and it has got heated at times because they have the Holocaust to remind them of how vile that Hitler was. But had Hitler never risen up and brought the persecution to the Jews would have never came to the land that we know today as the nation of Israel, because they would have been secured in European countries with their ability to run and live the high life and the financial life. And so God had to bring them to a place where they were getting on old dilapidated ships, the most famous, the Exodus, ships that actually sunk and they lost people, ships that were not capable of the crowds or the numbers that were put upon them. And they came for relief. And those people that once said, we'll never leave our lofty towers and our lofty places of business and give up and go to that desert land. And believe me, it was a desert back then. It wasn't the Israel you know today. It was a wasteland full of malaria in many places. They didn't have the water resources, and it didn't seem as if there was anything there that could draw them or make them or sustain the wealth that they had. And so it was that God raised up Hitler. But God did not expect Hitler to wipe out and kill all the Jewish people. He expected there to be a remnant that would be left that he would take. And this is the way, if you read through the Bible, oftentimes God said, I'm going to punish this, I'm going to do this, raise up the Assyrians, but I'm going to spare a remnant. And the same thing happened. In 1948, they became a nation, etc. The problem was, at a certain point, God had raised up America several hundred years earlier, not necessarily when they were a nation, but when he began the formation of it. And then, of course, they did become a nation. America's 244 years officially today, but it's much older in its coming together. And America was God's assurance that Hitler would not wipe out all the Jews and that Britain would stay its course because there were other issues that had to take place. And so America was not doing because they wanted neutrality. They didn't want the war. They didn't want to be involved in the war. And so God moved into the Japanese people, as terrible as it seems. Now, let me say this. When people will do the will of God, none of this has to take place. But when people decide that they're going to pilot their own life, live their own way, do their own things, God has ways of sending storms to your life to get you to surrender to the higher will and the purpose by which He has created you.